Hi, it's William from Exploding Ministries. We're continuing here with chapter 5 of the Gospel of Mark, which is our Bible study for this time. And we'll take up here what they were crossing the lake in the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained, hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Then he saw Jesus from a distance. He cried, he fell on his knees in front of him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torment me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you evil spirit." Here we're introduced to an individual who today we would say was suffering from severe mental illness. Yet the Bible is very clear. This man's mind has been affected by the spiritual presence which was afflicting him. It was causing him to have difficulties, problems. It was a personality that had formed within his personality. It had its own. In fact, when Jesus asked it to name who it was, this demon declared that its name was Legion, because it wasn't a single entity, but was many individual demons that had taken control of this man and was driving him to dementia. And this was an interesting concept, because the demons wanted to inflict him with pain, because this was part of their own ritual to show their dissatisfaction with the world. They brought pain and suffering even upon themselves through the bodies of the people they possessed. So the cutting with stones, the crying out, the throwing themselves down and twirling on the ground, all of this was related to the demonic possession. Yet when the spirits see Jesus coming towards them, they immediately recognize who it is, are filled with panic. But they don't run away from him. They know there is no point doing that. They run to him. They beg him to have mercy on them, not to punish them, not to torment them, not to bring them into judgment before the time. Because this is their concern. They are worried because they know they are guilty of grievous crimes against mankind, and they ultimately are to be subject to punishment. So they asked Jesus to swear by God that he is not going to punish them now. But notice what Jesus does. He says to them to go into a herd of swine. Now, a herd of swine, pigs to you and me, were on the hillside, and there was an estimated amount of thousands of these, about 2,000 in number, of these pigs all together in one place. But the moment the spiritual entities entered that entire herd of swine, it reacted violently, throwing itself off the cliff into its destruction, which of course was the purpose of the demons, to bring death and destruction to whoever they touched, to destroy. And when they were in the body of a man, reason and intellect and control took possession, and it was hard for them to get that man to that state where he would be willing to die. Yet at the same time, the pigs had no problem with that at all, because they had nothing to govern against. So when the demons possessed them, they automatically destroyed themselves in the lake, throwing themselves off the high cliffs. But you see, when the people who had been herding for the pigs, when they saw this, when they recognized that the man who had been demon possessed was no longer demon possessed, when they had saw the demons being transported from one being into their herd of pigs, and they saw the effect that had on the pegs, they didn't know what to do. They ran and they told all the people in the surrounding areas that this man who had come, this Jesus, what he had done. And when the people come, what do they find? They find that this individual is now sitting there in his right mind. He is no longer possessed. This man has been made completely and totally well. There is nothing wrong with him anymore. Everything is perfect. But the people are terrified. You see, they've never been introduced to anyone that has had that sort of power and position before. They've never experienced that. So this is totally different for them. What do they do? How do they deal with this? Well, they don't know. So they ask Jesus to leave. They say, go away from us. We're not good enough for the likes of you. Leave us. And so he does. But before he does, he tells the man to go out. Go back to his family and tell them what God has done for him. And this man does. He goes out and he goes around all the different towns, the Decapolis, which means the 5 surrounding towns around that area. And he went and he taught them and he said, yes, I am the man who was out of his head, who couldn't be held by chains, who all of you were afraid of, and yet I met a man called Jesus and he cast that sickness out of me. The demonic plague that was affecting me was cast free and I was allowed to be free. And then he sent me here to tell you of the wonderful things God has done for me as a witness. But you know, that's an important thing. When you receive a healing, you have to tell people about it. You have to encourage people and let them know that you have been healed. And we do from time to time tell of the different healings that we individually have experienced. And we'll tell you more as we come across them. But listen, let's continue with this Bible study. When Jesus had again crossed back over the lake, there was a crowd waiting for him still. They wanted to see miracles. They wanted to see the sick healed. They wanted to hear the preaching. They wanted to find out more about what this man was going to do. But among them in this particular time, there was a synagogue leader. His name was Jairus. Now Jairus had a daughter who was very, very ill. And so he came to Jesus and he begged him. He implored him, please, my little daughter is dying. Will you come and heal her so that she can live? And Jesus agreed. He says, yes, I'll come. There's no problem. Let's go. And so the large crowd followed him and pressing against him. And there was a big commotion, but they were moving gradually towards where they would need to go to heal this child. But suddenly Jesus stops. All of a sudden, he just stops. He turns around and he says, who touched me? And the disciples go, are you all right? I mean, come on. This is a massive crowd you're in. How do you ask people who touched you? Everybody's jostling you from all sides, and you're worried about who touched you? What do you mean? It doesn't make sense. He says, no, you don't understand. Somebody has just received a healing. Somebody has touched me with faith, and I have felt the virtue leave me, the power of God leave me, and they have been healed. Now I need to know who it was. Who was it who received their healing from me there now? A woman began to come forward. She was timid because she hadn't wanted to be recognized. You see, this woman had a problem, and her problem was very simple. She had an issue of blood, and it had been with her. She had been with her for 12 years. 12 years. And as a result of that, she hadn't been able even to maintain a living for herself because all her wealth, everything she had gone to doctors to try and get this sorted. But you know, she knew that if she could just touch the hem of Jesus' garment, if she could just reach out and touch the hem, the frill at the very end, that bit that was considered between the clean and the unclean, if she could touch that, that was all she would need to be made well. Because this woman, because of her condition, would have been considered a social outcast. She's not a leper. But because she's bleeding, she's considered unclean. And as such, she is meant to separate herself away from people, because everyone who touches her would become unclean. It's a ritual thing with Jews. So you see, this was a concern. And then for her to come and touch Jesus would make him unclean. But she thought, if I can just touch the hem of his garment. And the hem was that little frill that goes round the very bottom of the clothes. And it was designed so that while it touched the ground, it itself wasn't considered unclean, whereas the garment above it was considered clean or unclean. And so if she touched it, she wouldn't affect him, she wouldn't make him unclean, but at the same time she could be healed. And that's exactly what she'd done. She had forced her way through the crowd. She had waited to the final opportunity that presented itself, and as he passed, she touched. And instantly Jesus stopped and said, "Who touched me?" Now, when we look at this, we need to think about this for a moment, because there is a man standing there whose little daughter is dying. This man, he sees urgency and let's go heal my daughter. Whereas Jesus sees the need to stop and comfort this lady who has touched and received healing. So when she tells her story, when she tells them all that's happened, he says, "Woman, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." And as he turns back to go away again with the leader of the synagogue, suddenly people from his house come. They say, "There's no point the teacher coming anymore. Your little daughter has died. She is no longer alive. So you're too late." But Jesus ignored them. He came up to Jairus, and he says to him, "Only believe, and your little daughter will be restored to you." And so they went on as they were going. And as they come to the house, there was weeping and mourning, and the full ritual of mourning for the dead had started, and there was professional wailers there, and they were crying out. And Jesus says, "Will you just all stop it? The child's not dead, she's only asleep. I've come that she'll wake up." And immediately, these are professional people. They all know. They've examined the body. They've seen that the child is dead. They don't have a problem with it. They know the child is dead, and as a result of that, they basically start laughing at him. What's he know? He hasn't even seen her yet, and he's coming in saying that she's only asleep. What sort of man is this anyway? Who does he think he is? But Jesus said, "Get them all out of here, because I can't put up with this. Put them all out of here." And he just takes two of his disciples, and the father and the mother, and they go up to the little child. The little child is lying in the bed. And Jesus just speaks to her, takes her by the hand, and says to her, "Little girl, get up." And as soon as he said it, her eyes opened. And immediately she stood up, and she was able to get up out of bed, and she was perfectly well. Now this child was 12 years old. So it wasn't an infant, it wasn't somebody that they couldn't tell the difference. This child was 12 years old, she hadn't fallen asleep, she wasn't in any sort of a deep coma or anything else. She was able to get up, she was able to interact with them. And Jesus says to them, "Listen, this is very important. Do not tell anyone that the child was dead. She was asleep." But he didn't want the people to know who he was fully yet. He didn't want them to understand that he was the Messiah. He wanted them to recognize who he was, not through the miracles, but through the preaching and the teaching. And he said to the parents, "Give her something to eat. She's going to be hungry." And that's where we end chapter 5 of Mark, and so we're going to be doing chapter 6 next. But until then, this is William Andrews, Exploding Word Ministries. Goodbye.